this is a topic about discourse. It's actually a discourse on discourse. I've been joining these apps, I think, as early as possible for years and years and years since social media became a thing. And I look back at Clubhouse and the time early on when it was decent and then getting good, and then it got really horrible, and then it got worse. And I wonder what we can do to make discourse something that is more feasible, longer term, and doesn't always end up relegating us to ultimately the lowest common denominator. A challenge I've seen and experienced is the nature of how experts who discuss their field naturally have to simplify, dumb it down, have easier conversations in order to sort of have a larger audience. Whereas people who just flatly say things that are incredibly wrong or say the simplest version of a thing get immediately the most attention, the most followers, and the most setup. For example, AI, as it currently sits, most of the people who you might call experts on it don't actually understand it as a base thing. It's just a predictive language model based on probabilistic sort of outcomes. It's not really AI. The people working on proper general artificial intelligence are years away. They're not sexy yet. It's very boring. It's not really that's something that they can discuss. But the people who come out and say things like AI is already intelligent or the computers are talking to them, or that they're depressed because they saw that ChatGPT was suicidal and they actually are worried that there's someone or a soul inside of it. These people get insane followers. LinkedIn is basically the cancer of this. It's the same problem as if I were to talk about gravity as being a force or argue with a flat earther. You don't get to say things like, well, it's ultimately because time runs slower at my feet than my head. That's not a discussion you can start having. Personally run into this when we discuss philosophy. Philosophy groups on Clubhouse started with really good thought out things. I myself have spent years studying Gilles Deleuze and the thinkers around him. But when I join a Clubhouse room on what is truth, and someone joins to talk about astrology, and they think that's philosophy, somehow discourse dies. How do you build proper discourse inside of an app like this so it doesn't end up in that horrifying place?
You curate and you moderate, and you don't cross-pollinate people who are different places. You let organic discovery happen, and you encourage people to control who speaks in their rooms and about what. There is no such thing as a single community. When you hear people saying the Clubhouse community or the AirChat community, that just means that those sites are really small. There's no such thing as a Twitter community. There's no such thing as the Instagram community. There's no such thing as a TikTok community. They're too large. By definition, communities are built by who you keep out. And the moment you have too many people to keep out, you no longer have a single community. So instead, you have to segment and divide and break up these things into smaller communities. You cannot have a single community. So the mistake is having a single discourse. There is no monopoly on truth. There is no ultimate judge of quality. All that can happen is you let people create sub-communities, you give them moderation tools, you encourage them to moderation heavily, you try not to cross-mingle or intersperse them in unnatural ways, and then you let the market sort it out. And the people like you who want philosophical different discourse from people who read philosophy will find the philosophy rooms where only the people who have read philosophy are allowed to talk, and the rest have to listen. And the same way the people who want to talk astrology will find the rooms where the astrologers are allowed to talk, and everybody else has to listen. Just like in the real world. And everybody else has to listen. Just like in the real world. This room, for example, is set to open to all. That only works because the app is really small and you want someone to talk to. But the moment the app gets large, or the moment you have enough people to talk to, you should close it up. And you should kick out people who are not adding value or saying off-topic things or just not intelligent or not to your taste, whatever you prefer. But you're going to have to moderate this room. Without moderation, the concept of a community can't scale. Then you just end up with a giant mess. My theory is that long-term, the most successful rooms on this app will be the most heavily moderated and curated ones. But all we can do is build the tools and set the defaults. It's up to everyone here to use them. For example, in the room on remote work where I'm talking with David Sachs, I pick the speakers, and I'm only going to stitch in the high-quality comments. I'm not going to stitch in most of it, and I'm not going to invite anybody else to speak in the room because there's too much of an opportunity to grandstand.